And what did Lord Henry say? The book has this conversation. Dorian, never marry a woman with straw-colored hair, said Henry after a few puffs. Why, Henry? Because they are too sentimental. But I like sentimental people. Never marry at all, Dorian. Men marry because they are tired. Women because they are curious. Both are disappointed. My goodness, that's Wilde's sharp tongue at work. And what did Dorian Gray say? I don't think I am likely to marry, Henry. I'm too much in love. That's one of your aphorisms. I'm putting it into practice, as I do everything as you say. What a selfish and frivolous thought. Then the painter reminded them, saying, Henry, if a man lives only for himself, doesn't he pay a terrible price? Henry didn't care at all and told Dorian Gray not to worry about it. True, nowadays we pay dearly for everything. In my opinion, the real tragedy of the poor is that everything is too expensive for them, and the only thing they can afford is self-denial. But beautiful sins, like beautiful things, are the privilege of the rich. Henry's sense of superiority was overwhelming. Sibyl had no idea what these high society figures were thinking, nor did she understand Dorian Gray's character. She was simply awakened by love. She realized how fake her performances were. The sets were vulgar, the lines exaggerated, and the acting so dull. Because before this, she didn't know what real emotion was. Sibyl excitedly said, Dorian, Dorian, before I knew you, acting was the one reality of my life. It was only in the theater that I lived. You came, oh, my beautiful love, and you freed my soul from prison. You taught me what reality is. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw through the hollowness, the shame, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played. Tonight, for the first time, I became conscious that Romeo was hideous, old, and painted, that the moonlight in the orchard was false, that the scenery was vulgar, and that the words I had to speak were unreal, were not my words, were not what I wanted to say. You had brought me something higher, something of which all art is but a reflection. You made me understand what love is. So, Sibyl ruined her performance because she no longer wanted to live a life of pretense. She didn't want to recite insincere lines. She proposed leaving with Dorian to a place where there were no third parties, to reconnect with real life and love. And what was Dorian Gray's reaction? He flung himself down on the sofa and turned away his face. You have killed my love, he muttered very sadly. What did he mean? Sibyl looked at him in wonder and laughed. Then the beautiful girl came across to him, with her little fingers stroking his hair. She knelt and pressed his hands to her lips. He drew them away, and a shudder ran through him. Then he leaped up and went to the door. He cried, My God, how mad I was to love you! What a fool I have been! You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. You have spoiled the romance of my life. How little you can know of love if you say it mars your art. Without your art, you are nothing. I would have made you famous, splendid, magnificent. The world would have worshipped you, and you would have borne my name. What are you doing now? A third-rate actress with a pretty face. Dorian Gray said many cruel things to Sibyl. That night, in despair, Sibyl committed suicide by poisoning herself. Meanwhile, Dorian Gray was in his apartment when he was shocked to see that the portrait had started to change. The expression on the portrait's face was different. The corners of the mouth showed a hint of cruelty, slightly turned down. It was strange. Dorian walked over to the window and drew back the curtains. The bright dawn flooded the room and swept the fantastic shadows into dusky corners where they lay shuddering. The quivering, ardent sunlight showed him the lines of cruelty around the mouth as clearly as if he had been looking into a mirror after he had done some dreadful thing. This made Dorian realize that his previous wish had become a reality. He understood how wrong and cruel he had been towards Sibyl. He was harming others, which was why the portrait was becoming ugly and cruel. There was still time to remedy this. She could still become his wife. Dorian Gray was torn inside. He began to struggle. His hypocritical and selfish love would be influenced towards something more noble, becoming a purer emotion. And this portrait, the one the artist painted, would become Dorian Gray's lifelong guide. This portrait constantly recorded the path of his soul, leaving traces of both the good and the bad. So, Dorian Gray suddenly felt anxious. He planned to find Sibyl, apologize, and marry her. But he then learned that Sibyl had already died. She had committed suicide. Dorian Gray paced around the room, his face pale. He began to struggle internally, with one voice in his head saying, "I feel this is my responsibility." Another voice said, "She committed suicide. This unfortunate event prevented me from fulfilling my responsibilities. It's not my fault." Look at the conflict between good and evil, so real. Who doesn't have it inside them? At this moment, Dorian Gray was enduring pain within his contradictions. At this time, Lord Henry arrived and advised the young man, saying, "Sibyl's death is just a romantic tragedy." "Henry," cried Dorian Gray, coming over and sitting beside him, "why is it that I cannot feel this tragedy as much as I want to? I don't think I am heartless. Do you?" Henry sneered. "It is an interesting question," said Lord Henry, who found an exquisite pleasure in playing on the lad's unconscious egotism. Henry said, "In the present case, what is it that has happened? Someone has killed herself for the love of you. I wish that I had ever had such an experience. It would have made me in love with love for the rest of my life. The people who have adored me, there have not been very many, but there have been some, have always insisted on living on, long after I had ceased to care for them, or they to care for me. They have become stout and tedious, and when I meet them, they go in at once for reminiscences. Look at Lord Henry, how selfish, sly, and cold he is. He has no real feelings for individuals. So, what does Henry say next? He says, 'Oh, the obvious consolation, taking someone else's admirer when one loses one's own, in a good society that always whitewashes a woman.'" This is a very evil idea, but Henry successfully persuaded Dorian Gray. He said, "Think about it. How different Sibyl Vane must have been from all the women one meets. There is something to me quite beautiful about her death." At this moment, Dorian Gray was still a bit conflicted. He said, "I was terribly cruel to her. You forget that." What did Henry say? "Hard to say. I am afraid that women appreciate cruelty, downright cruelty, more than anything else. They have wonderfully primitive instincts. We have emancipated them, but they remain slaves looking for their masters all the same. They love being dominated. I am sure you were splendid. I have never seen you really and angry, but I can fancy how delightful you looked. Look at this. After reading the novel, if you feel anxious and someone tells you similar things in the future, you should know their true nature.